Hi there, welcome to Oakland Side 510. I'm Tasneem Raja, Editor-in-Chief of the Oakland Side, Oakland's independent nonprofit newsroom. This week, we are taking a close look at Oakland's City Council, specifically how your representative is showing up and doing their job. Our reporters counted every council vote in 2025 to tell you how often city council members were present for votes, how often they sponsored legislation, and what they had to say about their record. It's the kind of accountability data that should be easy to find, but isn't, unless someone does the work. City Hall reporters Eli Wolfe and Natalie Orenstein join me to break down what they found. Then, a deeply sad update on last month's mass shooting at a downtown Oakland nightclub. 1 in 5 funded city jobs is sitting vacant. A push to raise Oakland's minimum wage to $30 an hour. How license plate thieves can game the flock camera system. And you've heard me talk about the 12 Oakland high school students who are working with our newsroom. An update on our special fellowship program for local high schoolers interested in journalism. But first, a word from a local sponsor supporting this podcast. Do you believe in healthcare for all? So does Lifelong Medical Care. For more than 50 years, Lifelong has cared for the East Bay community, providing compassionate, high-quality care to anyone who needs it, regardless of ability to pay. Now, Lifelong is celebrating its 50th anniversary with a special gala at the Oakland Marriott on April 4th. Join them to celebrate 50 years of caring for the East Bay community. Get tickets at lifelongmedical.org/gala. Every year, our newsroom takes a step back to look at how Oakland City Council is doing its job. Specifically, how often members are showing up and voting. To walk us through what we found at the end of all of that and why any of this matters, I'm joined by City Hall reporters Eli Wolfe and Natalie Orenstein, who co-reported this story. Eli, Natalie, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Tasneem.
Great to be here.
Thanks, guys. Let's start with some basics, because I think a lot of people interact with City Council news without necessarily really knowing how City Council works. So, Natalie, can you just give us the quick picture?
Sure. So Oakland has 8 city council members. 7 of those represent specific geographic areas in the city. So wherever you live in Oakland, you have a district representative whose job is specifically to represent your interests, your neighborhood. And then there's one at-large seat, which represents the whole city.
Mm-hmm.
So the council overall is responsible for passing laws, approving the city's budget, signing off on major contracts. Of course, they do all of this by voting. So the act of voting is one of the most important things a council member does.
Mm-hmm.
And they do a lot of that work first in committees, which are smaller groups of council members that meet separately to focus on specific areas like public safety, public works, finance. And then the items after that go to the full council for a final vote.
Mm-hmm. So when we talk about voting records, we're really talking about 2 layers, committee votes and then full council votes.
Right. And both matter. People might pay more attention to the full council meetings, but a lot of the real deliberation happens at the committee level.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's where council members can slow things down, push things forward, or shape legislation before it gets to that full vote.
Mm-hmm. Now, this data is technically public, right? It's all in the city's meeting minutes, but it doesn't come prepackaged anywhere. The city doesn't put out a report on any of this. So, Eli, can you tell us what you guys actually have to do to get it and make it accessible for the reader?
Yeah, so the city publishes meeting minutes on its legislative website, Legistar,
Mm-hmm.
but those are individual PDF documents. So we're talking hundreds of pages across dozens of meetings. There's no dashboard. There's no compiled record that tells you how often each council member showed up and voted. We downloaded all of those PDFs and went through each of them one by one.
By hand.
By hand, yes. It's really the only way to get this information. That's our job. And even then, counting votes isn't as straightforward as it sounds. Sometimes a single piece of legislation gets broken into several recorded votes. We count that as one. Making things even trickier, 2 of the council members this year, Kevin Jenkins and Charlene Wong, only served for about half of 2025 for different reasons. So there are judgment calls involved in this reporting process, but we create some basic standards and then apply them equally to all the council members.
Mm-hmm. I think the big picture is worth sitting with for a second here. These are elected officials. Voting as is their core job. And yet a constituent who wants to know whether their council member is showing up to vote has no easy way to find out unless a reporter like you guys does this kind of work.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's not just attendance. I mean, the same thing is true of a lot of local government data, contracts, lobbying activity, campaign finance. All that stuff is technically public, but it's scattered across documents and formats that really aren't easy to use.
Right.
So part of what local journalism does is translate that into something that people can actually read and act on.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I understand. One of the most important functions of a city council member is to show up and vote when there's legislation on the table. But what you're saying is they don't always do that?
Yeah, they do not. As you'll see in the data in our story, there are some mechanisms to hold council members accountable for showing up to meetings, but really at the end of the day, they can miss a lot of votes and a lot of meetings.
Okay. So I guess ultimately it just comes down to they can keep doing their job if voters keep electing them in. There's no punitive measure in place otherwise for a council member who misses a lot of votes.
There are some consequences that council members can face when they miss a number of votes or a number of meetings. For example, eventually the council president could choose to remove them from a committee they sit on. But ultimately, accountability really lies with the voters.
Okay, so let's get into what you found. Who had the best participation record when it comes to voting?
Well, 2 council members had perfect attendance records and participation records for full city council meetings. That's Charlene Wong. She represents District 2, which includes Chinatown, San Antonio, East Lake, the Jack London district. And the other one was Rowena Brown, who holds the at-large seat. Neither missed any meetings or votes at those full council meetings. And it kind of fits into a broader pattern we saw, which is that the newest members of the council tended to have the best attendance overall. Zach Unger, who represents District 1 or North Oakland, was a close runner-up. He only missed a couple of votes at these meetings.
Okay, who had the worst attendance record?
That would be Carol Fife, who represents District 3. That's West Oakland and downtown. She missed the most votes at full council meetings, 27 overall, or about 19% of the total. Across council and committee meetings combined, she missed 78 votes total. Though 68 of those were excused absences, meaning she gave notice in advance.
Okay, now in your story, I know she pushed back on how you guys framed that.
Yeah, she did. Basically, she said that comparing the raw number of missed votes might be equal, but it's not equitable. Her point, in other words, is that council members have different obligations and that she's shown up in other ways to do her job other than voting.
Okay.
She pointed out that she sits on regional boards like the Alameda County Transportation Commission and ABAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments. And some of those meetings conflicted with council sessions. Fife also made the point that she considers her community organizing work to be the most effective part of her job, more so than legislation. She actually said, quote, legislation is almost irrelevant now.
That is a striking thing for a legislator to say. Now, that being said, I know her legislative record is actually pretty active, right?
It is, yeah. I mean, she's really prolific. She had the second highest number of sponsored or co-sponsored bills, 27, including some very substantive ones, like the amendments to restore the city's cultural affairs manager position and the Costco proposal for the former Army base site. So she's legislatively active even when she's not always in the room.
What does that mean to sponsor or co-sponsor a bill?
So it can mean a couple things. Sometimes it means that a elected official has actually authored legislation, worked with city staff to do that. Other times it can mean that someone has just tagged their name onto a bill, saying at kind of the last minute, oh, I endorse this. So it actually made tallying the legislation each council member was responsible for kind of difficult because there's not a really clear breakdown of who authored a bill versus who just put their name on a bill.
Okay, understood. So in 2025, who sponsored the most legislation overall?
That would be Noel Gallo. He represents District 5, the Fruitvale area. He sponsored or co-sponsored 30 bills. It's important to note he was council president for part of the year. So many of those bills were appointments to commissions, to boards, standard duties of that role, not available to other council members.
Understood. Okay, how about the other end? Who sponsored or co-sponsored the least legislation in 2025?
Councilmember Ken Houston sponsored the least. He represents District 7, that's Deep East Oakland. He sponsored or co-sponsored 14 pieces of legislation last year. He pushed back on the idea that he's not working hard on legislation. First of all, he's the guy behind one of the most debated and consequential pieces of legislation currently pending. That's a proposal for a city homelessness policy that would make it easier for Oakland to close and clear homeless camps, regardless of whether shelter was available for the residents or not. And Houston told us he's made many heavy lifts behind the scenes on other issues. He pointed to things like the flock surveillance camera contract and his support for changing Oakland's police pursuit policy. Those are examples of influence that don't always show up in sponsorship counts, he said. His line was, quote, "Even if I wasn't a co-writer of a policy, I spearheaded it."
Now, Houston, as we've covered on this podcast and in our reporting, has had quite a first year on the council.
He really did. And for this story, he's actually the only council member who told us he skipped a vote intentionally as a protest. This was at a Life Enrichment Committee meeting. The council was considering renewing Oakland's shelter crisis ordinance. That law allows the city to open emergency shelters and run homelessness programs that would otherwise face certain restrictions. So Houston made a motion to table this renewal, expressing frustration over how much Oakland spends on homelessness and over what he called a last-minute request by city staff. But when his motion failed, he walked out of the meeting. That action caused the committee to lose quorum, so no vote could happen. And when we talked to him, he was direct about it. He said, "I did that on purpose. I know my rights." And just for the record, for what it's worth, a few months later, the full council unanimously approved the ordinance anyway.
You know, I think it's really helpful to dig into some of these specific votes. Another one that I think is a good example of why it's important to sort of, be able to see the mechanisms in place here is the flock vote. That came up a couple of minutes ago. Eli, can you tell us a little bit more about how Charlene Wong navigated that one?
Yeah, that meeting was super contentious. Wong heads the Public Safety Committee, and she presided over a meeting that lasted several hours where community members on both sides were arguing passionately about surveillance, privacy, and civil liberties. Wong ultimately voted to approve the contract, but she wanted amendments added, including stiff fines if Flock violates the city's data sharing rules and a requirement to search for a new vendor when the contract expires. I think there were a couple other things. She described it as a vote she had to make under, quote, not ideal circumstances.
Okay, what about Rowena Brown, the at-large council member, and the other council member with a nearly perfect record? So what stood out to you guys about her first year?
Yeah, Brown was really methodical. She had one excused absence at a rules committee meeting all year, and she said she couldn't even recall what that was for. On legislation, she was pretty deliberate about building coalitions. This is something she talked about with me. One example is an ordinance that she authored last year to create entertainment activation zones around commercial corridors. The intent here is to boost Oakland's nightlife and foot traffic and just overall economic vitality. She talked about working closely with the business improvement districts, educational institutions, and nonprofits to kind of get this over the finish line. Her phrase was, quote, "That's coalition building."
Natalie, zooming out, what do you think people should actually take away from this reporting?
Well, the most basic thing is accountability. Voters deserve to know whether their representatives are showing up.
Sure.
But it also reveals something a bit deeper about how differently council members understand their roles. Some see voting as the core piece of what they do. Others prioritize other pieces of the job that include community presence, behind-the-scenes work, constituent services. Neither view is entirely wrong. But if you're a voter, it matters which one your representative holds. And right now, without reporting like this, you wouldn't have an easy way to find out.
And that is why you guys do this every year.
Exactly. And if I can just add here, if listeners have other ideas for things we should be looking into, things we can quantify, measure, or just reveal about how City Hall works, please let us know.
Eli, Natalie, thank you both.
Thanks, Tasneem.
Thank you.
You can find their full story with a breakdown of every council member's record at oaklandside.org. We will also link to it in the show notes. And if listeners have tips or suggestions, you can find Natalie and Eli's emails also in the show notes. All right, let's get into some other recent reporting from our newsroom. There's more in the full stories online, which we will link to in the show notes, and you can always find at oaklandside.org. Reading these stories is the best way you can learn about our city and help out our newsroom. Please sign up for our daily newsletter if you want to get our reporting in your inbox. I'm going to start with a deeply sad update on last month's mass shooting at Easy's Lounge, a downtown Oakland nightclub. 2 people were killed in the March 7th shooting. One of them was Letitia Bobo, a 33-year-old teacher known for running after-school writing clubs and mentoring students who needed extra support at her San Pablo charter school. Bobo's family held a memorial service this week, and Caliber Public Schools canceled school for the day so students and staff could attend. Our public safety reporter, Rosalind Romero, also published a separate story looking at the surveillance footage of the shooting, which appears to show one of the weapons firing at a rate that would only be possible if it had been illegally converted to fire automatically. An OPD lieutenant confirmed to us that it appeared that a fully automatic weapon was used. No arrests have yet been made. Now, here's a story that touches a lot of the frustrations Oaklanders feel about city services. Eli Wolfe reports that roughly 1 in 5 funded city jobs is currently vacant. About 840 positions that the city is authorized to fill, but just hasn't. Council members call the numbers, quote, disgraceful at a committee meeting this week. 2 major departments that residents rely on, planning and building, and Oakland's transportation department, both have vacancy rates hovering near 30%. One big reason? Human resources, the department responsible for hiring, itself has a nearly 45% vacancy rate. And hundreds more positions are sitting unfilled simply because departments haven't submitted the paperwork to start hiring. There's a big ballot fight shaping up for November. A coalition called Living Wage for All has started collecting signatures to put a $30 minimum wage on the ballot in both Oakland and Alameda County. The measure would require businesses with more than 100 employees and more than $1 million in revenue to hit that wage floor by 2030. Smaller businesses would have longer to phase it in. Oakland's current minimum wage is $17.34 an hour. Organizers say that polling shows that more than 70% of county voters support this idea. Business groups are expected to campaign against it. Here's an unintended consequence of Oakland's growing network of license plate reader cameras. Eli reports that thieves are increasingly stealing license plates and swapping them onto their own vehicles to evade the cameras. That's what happened to Ann Nomura, an Oakland resident who was pulled over by multiple Alameda County Sheriff's deputies on her way to work in Hayward after her plates had been swapped without her realizing it. No guns were drawn, but Nomura said she was being treated as a potential criminal and she believes she could have been hurt. Here's a quick update on something Oakland travelers may be wondering about. ICE agents have been deployed to at least 14 airports around the country to help with TSA during the government shutdown, with some airports seeing wait times of several hours. But as of this week, Oakland's airport has not seen any ICE deployments. And a spokesperson says security lines have not been longer than usual. Now, I want to share some good news from our own newsroom. The Oakland Side launched a student reporting fellowship this year. You may have heard about that. And we now have 12 Oakland public high schoolers working alongside our reporters. They were selected from about 80 applicants. They represent 7 schools across the city. They're developing story pitches, conducting interviews, and learning a lot from their Oakland Side reporting mentors. Fellows who complete the program will receive a $1,500 stipend. We cannot wait to share their work with you. Look for it soon at oaklandside.org. Finally, some education news you may be feeling come August, if not sooner. Ashley McBride reports that Oakland parents and teachers are pushing the district to act now on a persistent problem: overheated classrooms. Roughly 2,100 OUSD classrooms, making up more than 75% of OUSD's indoor space, lack any cooling system. During a heat wave last week, some classrooms hit 82 to 84 degrees. Parents at Sequoia Elementary have been buying their own thermometers and portable AC units to measure and address the problem. Now they're pushing the district to do the same district-wide before school starts in the fall. OUSD has about $8 million in bond funds set aside for ventilation and air quality improvements that hasn't yet been allocated to specific projects. All right, that's it for headlines. We'll link to all of this reporting in the show notes. That's this week's episode. You can find all the stories we talked about today at oaklandside.org. Sign up for our daily newsletter to get our reporting delivered to your inbox. This episode was produced by Mark Nieto, edited by Darwin Bongram, and hosted by me, Oaklandside Editor-in-Chief Tasneem Raja. On behalf of our entire newsroom, thank you for showing up for Oakland. We'll see you next week.